right. Thanks everybody for being with us. Welcome to the class tonight. We are still looking at our chapters in Romans, chapters 5 through 8. And in these last couple of classes, we've been focusing in chapter 6, and we're going to continue that focus. The last class we ended at the place we want to start tonight, and that's in Romans chapter 6 and verse 12. It says, "Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lusts thereof. Neither yield ye your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin, but yield yourselves unto God, as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace." And instead of under the law but under grace, you could say you're no longer in this man, you're in this man. You're no longer in sin and death, you're in life and righteousness himself. Because again, we're still addressing a distinction and a division God has made between two men. A man in whom and of whose seed we were born from our natural parents, and that seed determined our state from that moment of birth. And a man of whose seed we are born again, or born of the Spirit now. And that seed who now is in us by birth, the one born in us, birthed in the soul, created for that, determines the state of that soul, determines reality for that soul, determines God's perspective with regard to that soul, as this man did and that seed did. And this is very important, because I want us to understand how foolish, and we're going to talk about what this doesn't mean, but I want to focus more on what it does mean. Let's go ahead and talk about what it does not mean. Paul is not saying, in the light of all this, look at the context of all these things, guys. He's speaking of, in chapter 3, he's speaking of people who are under the law and believe because they have the law, which is the external righteousnesses, the external deeds and functions of that system. Because they are adherents to it and obedient to it, they have a righteousness that is greater than that of the Gentiles. And Paul comes in having seen the righteousness that exceeds even the righteousness of those scribes and Pharisees, the highest of the high, the most perfect adherents to the law itself, as Paul was at one time himself. Having seen a more perfect and greater exceeding righteousness, he is able to say to them, guys, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or you're a Gentile, male, female. It doesn't matter. You are all under sin, under the dominion embodied in sin. And no matter what you do, you can't get yourself out of that state. That's your condition. And no amount of goodness by the law can change that state, because that state is already established because of a seed and a life that is in you. And it doesn't matter what you are naturally. That's just another distinction or another not deviation, but another division of the same man. Doesn't matter. That's why he can also say, guys, it doesn't matter if you're circumcised or not. Why? Because he's seen a reality that is determined and that is established and that is real, a reality that has no association to flesh and blood, to the Adamic man, to this body, to this flesh. It is something altogether other. We talked about that in the earlier classes. That this body is altogether different than this body. And that's why he is continually hammering that point in 1 Corinthians 15. This body is different than this body. The glory of this is different than the glory of this. This is different. This is different than this one. And he's making those contrasts and those comparisons and showing they have nothing similar, nothing comparable in each other. And then he goes to the perfect explanation of that and says, so is the resurrection of the dead. One is sown corruption, one is raised in corruption. One is non-glorious, one is glorious, one is whatever. All of the things that he says there. And this is what we're addressing. An absolute God-wrought transition from one man to another man. From death unto life. A complete work of the Spirit, finished work of God, wrought in the heart, born of the seed of a perfect life, seed of the perfect man. Because if the perfect man is in you, he is in you. And he determines all things. Now, until the soul that he inhabits is aware of the presence and is transformed in the seeing of the one who is present, then we will still have this man and all of his outward accoutrements in our perspective, in our view. And we will attempt to determine the effectiveness or efficacy of this man or our state in this man looking at this. And that's what he's addressing in these chapters, because he's saying this is so, guys, in that he has died unto sin once and put this man away once and for all. He liveth unto God, bringing us from the one man here who determines all things in the sight of God, to the one man here who stands in the sight of God and determines in the sight of God our state, because he has made unto our soul such a perfect state of being. That's grace. Not I. Christ liveth in me. And there's a reckoning or a recognition or an acknowledging of such a transaction that has happened. That's why it's an accounting word. Reckon is an accounting word. It's like all of these things have been brought into your account now. You must recognize such a transaction. Recognize the change. Recognize this transition, or else you're going to be left looking at this to try to determine and define this man. Looking at the Adamic, looking at the outward, looking at the flesh to determine what is spirit and what is truth and what is life and what is godly and what is divine and what is spiritual. And it's a lie. Now, all right, now, so what does this mean? A recognition, and the scripture says, likewise, in that he died unto sin once, but in that he liveth unto God. Simplicity, singleness, the perspective of God defined in the presence, in the abiding presence of one. The one in whom we live, the one who is abiding in our soul, and that abides there faithful, because he cannot be less than who he is. And you can't make him less than who he is. He lives in you. Now, does this give us license to do a bunch of junk and stupid things? Absolutely not. But guess what? You are going to do a lot of junk and you're going to do a lot of stupid things because that's who you are. That's your nature. And we better thank God. And although we don't pursue all of the absurdities and justify them, we realize that in the midst of our stupidity and in the midst of our mess ups, we have one who lives in the sight of God as our intercession, as the advocate, the man, Christ Jesus. He stands there as our life. And the need of the soul is to stand awaiting continually the appearing of that man who is our life. The seeing of him, the knowing of him, and live in accordance to a present reality and not live attempting to achieve one that we do not believe is present because we are blind, meaning we see this and not this. So what does it mean? Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. Guys, this is not, again, the things that we have thought. Don't do bad stuff. Do better stuff. He has just ended these chapters leading up to that statement, showing you it doesn't matter how good the stuff is you do, who you are is the issue. Sin is not the result of what you've done. They were doing the perfect law. They were doing what the law said do. Paul himself said he did it blamelessly. And yet, God, by the law, condemned Paul and demonstrated to him how exceedingly sinful he was. Yeah, but I'm doing the law. How can that be sinful? Because it's you doing it. Feed hungry people. Take care of orphans. But it's still you. You see, righteousness is defined in another realm, guys. And until we behold that realm, we're still going to define it here. And that's where the body, the instruments of our mortal flesh comes in. And that's what Paul is saying. Listen, until you behold the one who lives unto God, you're going to insist that you do. And you're going to make every effort and implement every means and method to try your best to live unto God perfectly, without fault, without defect. And there's only one who is without fault and without defect. And in that one, he keeps us from falling and keeps us blameless in the sight of him and his glory. Because he is our life. He has just defined sin not in deeds done, but in a man who does the best deeds or the worst deeds. Whatever. Circumcision, adultery, doesn't matter. It's of this man. It's sin. It falls short. It comes short of the goal, short of the glory of God, short. Sin. Let not sin reign or govern. Paul will describe in Romans 7 that the sin in him, this is verse 11, chapter 7 of Romans, sin taking occasion by the commandment deceived me and slew me, or showed me to be dead. Showed my death, my state of death. Because I was here, still here, found here. I was implementing the members of a man who cannot achieve what Christ is. But what was governing him? What was motivating and energizing him in all of this? Was it God? No. It was sin. under the disguise of God and under the disguise of godliness, but sin nonetheless. It was the man who falls short, the nature who falls short of this perfection, taking a commandment, taking a letter that declares perfection and applying it to himself, the man of flesh. Let me type something in here. This is important. This is in verse 6 of chapter 7 of Romans. And he's saying the same thing, because he's going to talk about himself as a man doing this very thing. And he's showing them, guys, we must live governed and walk in and serve in, that is, being servants, in the newness of spirit. That is, again, walking in newness of life that he addresses in chapter 6. Look at what he says. Chapter 7 of Romans, verse 6. But now we are delivered from the law. Remember what he says right here? For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but you are under grace. You're still under something, but you're not under the law because you're not under this man. You're under grace because you're in this man. You're still the servants. You're still the slaves of something, but you're either slaves of this or this. Servants of this or that, governed by one or the other. Because you have no independent existence here. Found in one or the other, governed by one or the other. We are delivered. This is the deliverance he talks about at the end of this chapter 7 of Romans, that he finds in another life, in another man, the man who is not the empowerment of Paul to be righteous, but is the righteousness of the law fulfilled in Paul. Another life altogether. Now we are delivered from the law, that being dead in which we were held, that you should serve now in newness of spirit, not in the oldness of the letter. What does that mean? It's this here. Letting not sin. Remember what he says again in Romans 7. The commandment, the letter, the commandment. Sin that was in me took the commandment, the letter, and said, apply this to yourself and you will be like this. You will achieve this goal. You will bring about this end. You will be the good that this testifies of. And he says, I wasn't. I was evil, and the good was someone else, perhaps. I could never get to that point. But I was motivated by the sin, and the sin that was in me. Lust. And I was governed by it. And it motivated everything I did. Even the application of this holy testimony. The application of this holy testimony to myself was not God's doing. It was the result of sin. Sin motivated it. It's the man who falls short, looking for every tool in his tool chest to make up the difference. So what does it mean to serve in the newness of spirit, not in the oldness of letter? Well, serving in the oldness of the letter means you take the letter, that's why the spirit gives life, but the letter killeth, he says. The oldness of the letter Serving in the oldness of the letter is what? Taking this written word, taking the words, taking the testimony and applying it to me. It's still a dead testimony, and I'm applying it to death himself. It's dead. That's why it's dead works. It's a testimony of a perfect life, but I'm applying the letter of it, the words that testify of such perfection, to myself, because I have not yet seen the life and the spirit that these words declare. So I'm applying them to myself. And I live in the servitude of letter and the bondage of it, because it just binds me to myself. The other binds me to perfection himself, shows him living in me as the reality of these words, of the substance of these letters. I am come to fulfill. He is seen as my life unto God, and I can stop applying the letter to myself to try to live unto God. Do you see it? You understand? This is what it means to allow sin to reign, govern in your mortal body. Because it activates, motivates your mortal body to try to produce this. And it keeps you blind because it keeps you focused here. And gives this as a promise, as something that will be, as something that will be achieved, will be produced, now or in the world to come. Blinds you to the presence of this one. Blinds you to the one that is in you as everything you are attempting to achieve. It is sin motivating your deeds. That's why we'll talk about it. That's why in Colossians he says, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds. That's the deeds he's talking about, the deeds of the body trying to achieve something. Go back to chapter 2 of Colossians. That's exactly what he's saying they're doing. Intruding into the testimonial things, circumcision, holy days, feasts. Because they believe that that is the means by which they will have a life and relationship unto God. And he says, no, your life unto God is a hidden life that must appear. Therefore, we'll get into it in a moment. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey sin in the lusts. Sin and lust are the same. It's the lust. The flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit lusts against the flesh. Why? Because they have one and the same goal. The flesh has the goal of divine spiritual life, spiritual righteousness, holiness, to have something of God's view upon it. The spirit beholds the one who is the perspective of the Father. And while the goal is the same, the means and the method is not. Flesh says, if I apply the letter properly, do what it says, I can be something. The Spirit says, He has made unto you all things. Come and see the man. The goal is the same. But one sees the goal as a progressive achievement. The other sees the one who is gifted to the soul as fullness. And he reveals such fullness in the soul that will look for him. The other keeps you blind and on the hamster wheel of religion. And one day you can either give up because you know it's not working, or you can be fooled into believing that you have achieved something of divine life. Because that is what the lust of flesh and sin does. And we apply our mortal body to bring it about. because we haven't seen such perfection, and we think that by applying the letter to our mortal flesh, we make up what's lacking. We fill up what is deficient. And that is absurd. That is an absurd statement. Then he goes on in verse 13. Neither yield your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin. Same thing. You're just yielding your mortal members. Touch not, taste not, handle not. Circumcision, holy days, observances. You're yielding your members as instruments to be methods and means and instrumentalities to produce this spiritual goal, but you're actually yielding yourself to the unrighteousness and sin that's in you, because you're motivated by the lust of your flesh and not by the seeing of perfection. There's a totally different motive, totally different energizing spirit behind it. That's why he says the motions of sin, which is by the law, in chapter 7. As those that are alive, here it is. Do not yield your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin, but yield yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, as those who have come from death unto life, other translations say. Oh, this is a real yielding of yourselves. As what? Those who have no room to boast in anything, because you didn't bring yourself from Adam to Christ or death to life. You had no instrumentality, no actual, active, effectual part in this transition that's already happened. You had no part of it. You didn't do it. See? In such a yielding of your members to Him in light, in truth of a present gifting of grace, you have no room to boast. You're not boasting in the achievement of your instruments of the instruments of your body. Your body, your instruments are now given over to the one who has brought about this great transition from death unto life. And you desire to see that life so that your body can be given to the service of Him as life. You serve the living one who is in you, in your mortal body. And you no longer look at your mortal body to demonstrate who He is or to achieve what is lacking in Him. You serve in the light of a present, perfect life. And what does that service look like? That I may know Him. Not be found having anything of my own. Apprehending that for which I am apprehending. Not trying to apprehend something that I think is lacking because I haven't seen Him. There's a perfection given by the grace of God that has brought you from the law to grace, death to life, Adam to Christ, sin to righteousness. And this transition, if we are to know this transition in the beholding of Him, in the revealing of the indwelling Son, who is such perfection in the soul, we will know liberty. Not I, but Christ. We will cease attempting to try to be and produce and exhibit what we have found Him and Him alone to be. Galatians 5:18, and if by the Spirit you are led, you are not under the law. We're going to talk about that when we get to Romans 8, being led of the Spirit. It's wonderful. It talks about this man as your destination. Being led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. The liberty from law is not a matter of perfect obedience, but the soul being led to the perfect end, who is the obedient one. Galatians 5:16 through 18, I say, walk in the Spirit, and the desire of the flesh you may not complete. For the flesh doth desire contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit contrary to the flesh, and these are opposed one to another, that the things that you may will, these you may not do. We see it in Romans 7, right? Look in yourself. You probably see it there every day. And if by the Spirit you are led, you're not under the law. Notice the dominion of sin rests upon those who are under the law, or in the man who is under the law's dominion. That's the qualification of being under the law in this man. Religion lives, exists, breathes, and is strengthened by the desire to get you to implement your flesh to produce God's end. And I'm here to tell you that God's end is already in you. And you cannot produce such perfection. If you think you can, we are barking up a big, big, big tree that's the wrong one. We are dead wrong. There is no possibility. Paul would say it to the Galatians, these people are desiring you, and I would love for people to desire you, but they desire so that they can glory in your flesh. Religion desires to glory in your flesh, your adherence to their doctrines and their concepts. Listen, adherence comes in the seeing of this man. That's when your body is no longer the object and objective. This flesh is no longer the objective and the object to make it something, to look like something, to exhibit something. No. He is the perfect body of the perfect man. And we live in the awareness and the recognition of that being our present condition. And we no longer implement by letter and the sin that motivates our mortal flesh to produce something, because we've seen him as the production of it, as that reality produced. I wrote these things. The natural mind sees nothing, knows nothing regarding spiritual substance. Those of flesh, of mind the things of the flesh. You'll say it in Romans 8. Those who are in the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. They see themselves. They can't see anything other than themselves. They are altogether blinded and bound to this man. Therefore, it will call for the implementation of efforts and actions by the mortal body, and thus offer the members of that body to the unrighteousness and the sin that governs him, the lust of flesh, to achieve God's ultimate aim. See, we're speaking in reference to men who desire spiritual standing before God, not a bunch of heathen who's out doing bad stuff. This effort, implementing of the natural body, is towards fulfilling the perpetual lust for divine matters. It is Ishmael utilizing the members of his body and everything else that he can find to take for himself an inheritance and a blessing that belongs to the seed of God. Who you We're going to get into these other chapters and the other verses 15 and 16 in another class. We're going to look at that, and that's very important. But I want to take you somewhere else just for the rest of this time. A couple of places. Just one we'll talk about and the other we'll turn to. First, here's the thing. If we think that this is addressing man having to get his mortal body in check, and again, we're not edifying men to live anyway. I'm just telling you that's not Paul's point here. If we believe that flesh and blood can ever give evidence to divine spiritual perfection, it shows us and demonstrates how we are attempting to define such perfection with this man in view. If we ever believe we can achieve it, if we ever think that we have an absolute possibility of exhibiting this perfection. Remember, this body's not anything like this. And it's never going to be. This is the implementation of natural, seen flesh and blood. To the letter. When he is the substance of which that letter speaks. Grace is not the empowerment of flesh to live holy. It is the gift of God, of the holiness of God to a man, to the soul that has no hope for it otherwise. It's not how we can make flesh and spirit cooperate and bring about an end or bring about an evidence of an end. And if we think that again, we are foolish and we're fooling ourselves. We're deceived and we're deceiving others. And you have to look no further than Matthew chapter 5 to see it. Jesus is speaking to the most perfectly outward righteous people, or the most perfect people when it comes to outward righteousness. He's speaking to law keepers, to Pharisees, to Jews. He's speaking to people who are keepers of the law. And he says, do not think, this is how he prefaces what he's going to say. Do not believe that I've come to destroy, put away, decimate, and count as nothing the law and the prophets. That's not my intention. I am come to fulfill it, meaning I am the fullness and the reckoning of that testimony. I fill it up. I bring it to its end and ultimate aim. That's who I am. I don't destroy it. I make it complete and am the sure amen of it. Now, in the light of that, then, he begins to talk about that law. And he says, you have heard it said in time past. Now look how he does this, the transition that we are now being shown. He is taking the law of Moses and he is saying time past, because he's addressing a bringing in of an altogether new reality. Not something that abrogates or counts void the previous one, but what fulfills it and makes it substantive and gives substance to those empty, the framework of the testimony. Basically he's saying that was a framed picture. I'm the person that picture is of. That was a blueprint. I'm the house. It's different. Doesn't void it. It just brings substance to it, makes it a real, tangible, living, or not tangible, but living reality. Now, what he's just done, again, make the transition of saying time past, and now he's saying, I'm the present truth of this. I'm the present reality of this. This has no longer a validation except me. You applying this letter to your flesh is not working. I'm the meaning of it. Always have been. So then he brings in this matter of deeds. And he says to them, here's what the law said. Time past you heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that if you look at a woman to lust after in your heart, you've already committed it in your heart. You look at a woman to lust, you've already committed adultery. You've done it already. Why? Because it's done in your heart. Your body doesn't even have to be implemented for it to actually be done. Now, man, that throws a monkey wrench into this situation. And so people look, and I've heard people say, boy, that means that what Jesus brings in, that Jesus is showing that the law was a lot stricter than the not doing of things. And to that, I give a wholehearted amen. That's exactly what he's showing them. But what he's also demonstrating to them is an impossibility for them to ever be and do what the law says, because he's now taking it out of the realm of actions or non-actions, of fleshly, the cessation of external deeds or not doing certain things. He's taking it out of that realm of flesh and blood and bringing it inward and saying this has nothing to do with outward things, has nothing to do with the deeds. Paul at one time thought it did, and he said, I'm blameless doing the things. But then he realized this had to be an inward condition, not something outward. And he's saying, the evil that's in me can't be that perfect. Can't be that perfect. That's why we love for the body to be the mode of such perfect evidence. Because we can make you think it. We can make you believe that that's perfection. Why? Because we're still defining the perfection, righteousness, holiness in this realm of flesh and blood, in the Adamic realm, when it is an altogether other reality that can never be defined here. You have no concept of righteousness until this man is seen. And when you see that righteousness as it is revealed of God in the face of Jesus Christ, you will see how foolish it was to ever believe that you could find it here in this flesh. Ridiculous. That's why our soul must come to a beholding of a man who is perfect, a man who is spirit and life. So he's presenting this impossibility of man, because he's taking it totally out of that realm and saying, it was never about you doing things or not doing things. And you can say, well, I don't do that. Oh, I must be pretty good. And that's about how deep most people's relationship to God is. He brings it inward, and he says, no, it's about a life that has no capacity for such things in it. It can't even conceive the thought. That seed has such perfection in it, such God in it, that it has no ability to even conceive the thought. It's not just not murdering your brother, he'll go on to say. It's about not even being angry with your brother. Now tell me that that's something you can do. Well, I'm striving. Well, you're striving in vain. That's something only this man is. And you can lie and you can tell me you have never been angry with your brother. You love everybody, and I'll call it bunk and deception. And you being governed by sin and lust, because you can't just boast in the fact that he has made unto you all things. You want to find glory in your achievement of it. And Jesus is describing to them the righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. Because the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, as beautiful, perfect, and real as it may have been, it was perfect here, real here. It didn't touch this. Not even close. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so my ways and thoughts are above yours. So is everything he is. That perfection, that beauty, We bring it down in the earth and we say, this is what it looks like. No, it doesn't. What it looks like is beheld in the face of a perfect man. Faith, accessing Him as the grace in which we stand and beholding life as it truly is, not as we can make it to be if we apply the letter properly. He comes as the fullness of it, because He comes as the life that is perfect and has no anger with his brother, has no ability to lust in his heart, can't even look upon it in lust. See, again, is that you? Is that any human being that's, no. He's described human being under the law, perfectly adhering to it, and he says fornication, adultery, anger, wrath, because that's who you are. I don't do that. No, it's who you are. It's inward. It's a seed that has determined this thing. Then we go to Colossians. And there's much more in Matthew 5 we could say, but we go into Colossians. Colossians says, again, he's dealing with people who are going to the law, going and again, serving in the oldness of the letter and not in the newness of the Spirit. Meaning your service is no deeper than applying the letter to yourself, and you haven't seen the life and the substance of which that letter speaks. That's why the letter killeth, but the Spirit gives life, because the Spirit is the provision of the life that the letter could never provide. And are we living in that servitude, that comprehension, that reckoning is the question. Because if not, we will do these things. We will implement our members to try to make up what we think is lacking in Him. Or at least in the portion of Him we think's in us, or whatever. No, we're defining things here. We're thinking humanly upon divine matters. And it's foolishness and it's deception. And we'll give our whole hearts to it. And again, yes, he is in Matthew 5 describing something that is so strict and so perfect that it's not just about not doing. That's right. Amen. But he's not saying, so you got to try harder. He's showing them a superseding, perfect life. And that's why Paul can say, having seen that righteousness that exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, my desire now, having seen Him, is to be found in Him, not having a righteousness of my own, but apprehending the one that has apprehended me. So then in Colossians, again, he goes on, brings in these things that they're going back to, having previously stated the fact that in Him's all the fullness, and they are complete in Him, and that they have been circumcised and put off a whole body of sin. And then he says, so therefore, this being the transaction that's happened, don't let anyone judge you in these things, or bring you under the judgment of these things and say, why are you not doing these things? He says they are mere shadows. They have no substance. The substance is Christ Himself who is in you. And he says, so all they're doing is intruding into a testimonial, the testimony that was not about them. Trying to apply the letter of the testimony to flesh to bring about a spiritual end. That will never happen. So he says, wherefore, if you are dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why as though living in the world, that's still here, in this man, in this age, in this realm, and trying to define and be in this what is only found here. And how do we do that? Touch not, taste not, handle not. Why? Because this is how deep we go, guys. This is how deep it is. Flesh. Look at all of it. I'm telling you, it goes no further than flesh. It goes no further than that. And even if it does and we say, oh, it's an inward work, eventually flesh comes into the picture to make it real. Or to show you how real it is. No, He's the real. He's the realness of it all. And it's beheld in His face and never in our own. It's beheld in His substance and never in our vanity. These things are to perish with the using. Touch not, taste not, handle not. Why are you subject to these things? These things have indeed a show of wisdom. Well, that's mostly what we want. A show, an outward display of wisdom and will worship, humility, neglecting of the body, not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. And then he goes on, if you are then risen, since you are risen with Christ, since this is your state, seek the things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. That's a finished work. That's who He is. Set your heart there. Set your affection on things above, not the things on the earth, for you are dead and your life is hid with Christ in God. We've talked about this. And when Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with Him in glory. A reality that is present because He's there, because you're found in Him, will be made known in His appearing. Set your heart there. Because as long as your heart is set on the earth, you're going to look for the evidence of what is above there. And you're going to try to be the means and the method and the instrumentality to bring that evidence about. Set your heart above. Because that's where your life is found. It's hidden from your natural eyes, hidden from natural men. It must be revealed of God. And when it's revealed of God, a reality that you may have attempted to achieve under that system of touch not, taste not, handle not, is seen to be a perfect state defined in a perfect man that is in you. And in the light of such instruction, such direction, he then brings again this part. Mortify therefore your members that are on the earth. Reckon them lost, reckon them dead, no longer as instruments to bring it about. Set your heart to see the one who is the righteousness you in your mortal flesh attempted to achieve, because you, in all of your external implementations of your body to bring about spiritual end, this is what you are: fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil, concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry. And for which things these things sake, the wrath of God comes upon the children of disobedience. Who's he talking about there? Who's the wrath of God about to come upon? Has at the cross and will effectively outwardly come to them at 70 AD. It's the Jews who are implementing their natural mortal flesh to bring about this, and to be the substance that only Christ is. To take what belongs to this man unto themselves. Lust of the flesh. That's who you are by nature. In which you also walked sometime when you lived in them. But now, see, it was about where you lived. But now ye also put off these: anger, wrath, blasphemy, malice, filthy communications out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds. Again, the deeds of the law, the deeds of flesh to try to achieve a spiritual end. Put it off. You have put that man away. You've been circumcised and put off a whole body of sin. And although that man wants to implement everything he can to achieve God's end is achieved and he is in you. And if you are born of the Spirit and Christ is in you, the hope of glory, you have put on the new man and put off the old man. That new man is renewed in knowledge. That means there's an ongoing comprehending of this new life that is present. An ongoing working of God where we know the life that is present. And if we are knowing the life that is present, we no longer attempt to achieve the attributes of that life foolishly. Because we've seen the reality defined in this perfect realm, and we're no longer trying to bring it into the earth to define it here. And say, this is what it is. No, He's what it is. Come and see the man. Set your heart to behold Him. You who by implementation of law and rituals and religion, you've fallen from grace. You stepped outside of the boundaries of the grace of God. You're no longer by faith accessing the grace in which you stand. You're trying by whatever means you find that you can implement to bring about that end. But we who are of the Spirit wait on Him to appear, who is the righteousness of God. Wherefore, or where there is neither Jew nor Greek, circumcision, uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond, free, but Christ is all and in all. Then he's talking about a putting on. He says you've already put Him on, but it's the reckoning. It's the recognizing. It's living in the understanding and the acknowledgement of what God has provided in grace. And living every day in these bodies in the light of reality, where we no longer implement the bodies by means of the letter to achieve the end. We live in these bodies as servants of the end who is present. May we see the life that is not seen with natural eyes. May we behold a man that cannot be evidenced by flesh and blood. May our hearts be joined to and servants of a living substance that cannot be evidenced and that is inassociable and unassociated with the outward, with man, with flesh. A salvation without reference to sin. May that be the one revealed in our hearts, because that is the one who is there. May we live in such a view of such perfection. Thank you guys for being with us. We will pick up here in our next class together. There's a conference coming up in Virginia, Tazewell, Virginia, there in Baptist Valley Road. I don't know how the exact address, I'll get that, but it's at Gospel Lighthouse Tabernacle, is the name of it. Sister Peggy Carr is pastor, and they're going to host this conference for us, and we're looking forward to it. It's the 8th, 9th, and 10th of September, just the 3 days weekend, and some of us are going to be going up from there, or going there from here. So, hey, if you're anywhere near there or you can make it there, please join us. We will not be broadcasting it live, but we may be recording it. I'm not certain, but we'll see. I know we'll record the audio of it, and we'll have that for you can listen to. So just keep us in prayer as that conference is going on, or join us if you can. Until next time, thanks for being with us, guys. Amen.